Welcome and welcome back, everybody, to the OK Grognard Show. It is Monday, October 11th, 2021, 10 a.m. ish Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Had some things I had to do outside of the house and it took me a little longer than I expected, so I'm sorry I'm starting a little bit late today. But if you're here, I appreciate it. We're going to look at the Dungeon Masters Guide section on the campaign and setting things in motion. It is a useful part of the book. I think I kind of glossed over this section once before, talked about coming back to it, and meant to do so but hadn't done so, so now I am, and here we are. Makes sense to me. Anyway, let's dive right in since we're already running a bit behind, and we'll see what we got here. It's like page 88 of the DMG The Campaign. Unlike most games, AD&D is an ongoing collection of episode adventures, each of which constitutes a session of play. I've heard, I'm going to editorialize all the way through this, different points, and I'll try to be clear about when I'm doing so. I have heard a number of people say they don't like the use of the word session for folks of a certain age. I think, good morning, George. Thanks for popping in the chat. I think session was often often conflated with therapy sessions, and not physical therapy sessions. And there was a time, probably still is for some people, when having mental health issues was taboo to speak of, let alone have, and calling a game session a session, especially when it's a role-playing game, and role-playing was used a lot in therapy, I think still is. Kind of conflated the two in their minds, so it, but I don't have a problem with it. I think Gary uses it and uses it precisely and correctly as he does with almost all his language. So there it is. Each of which constitutes a session of play. You, as the Dungeon Master, are about to embark on a new career, that of Universe Maker. And career is not an underestimate of the amount of time that you can put in. And like a career rather than a job, it is one of those pursuits where the more time you put in, the more you get out of it. So there is that. Hey, we got the cool shirt on today. Nice. Anyway, you will order the universe and direct the activities in each game, becoming one of the elite group of campaign referees referred to as DMs in the vernacular of AD&D. What lies ahead will require the use of all of your skill, put a strain on your imagination, bring your creativity to the fore, test your patience, and exhaust your free time. Being a DM is no matter to be taken lightly! Exclamation point. Hey, Rick. All right. You're on break, apparently. Good for you. Your campaign requires the above from you, and participation by your players. To belabor an old saw, Rome wasn't built in a day. You are probably just learning, so take small steps at first. The milieu for the initial Adventures should be kept to a size commensurate with the needs of campaign participants. Your available time as compared with the demands of the players. This will typically result in your giving them a brief background, placing them in a settlement, and stating that they should prepare themselves to find and explore the dungeon/ruin they know is nearby. Time-honored campaign beginning. As background, you inform them that they are from some nearby place where they were apprentices, learning their respective professions, that they met by chance in an inn or tavern and resolved to journey together to seek their fortunes in the dangerous environment, and that, beyond the knowledge common to the area, speech, alignment, races, and the like, they know nothing of the world. Placing these new participants in a small settlement means that you need do only minimal work describing the place and its inhabitants. Likewise, as player characters are inexperienced, a small dungeon or ruins map will suffice to begin play. If you've DM'd for any amount of time, you've certainly started at least one or some or all of your campaigns in this way. It's fairly easy to do. It's a good way to start. It's as I recall in the original D&D books, the way they described starting a campaign. A little settlement, a place that can act as a sort of a safe place or a headquarters, and a nearby ruins or dungeon or dangerous location that needs exploring or wiping out because it's a danger to the town, even perhaps some sort of motivation along those lines is often a good idea. I'll continue. After a few episodes of play, you and your campaign participants will be ready for expansion of the milieu. The territory around the settlement, likely the home, city, or town of the adventurers, other nearby habitations, wilderness areas, and whatever else you determine is right for the area, should be sketch mapped, and places likely to become settings for play actually done in detail. At this time, it is probable that you will have to have a large-scale map of the whole continent or subcontinent involved, some rough outlines of the political divisions of the place, notes on predominant terrain features, indications of the distribution of creature types, and some plans as to what conflicts are likely to occur. In short, you will have to create the social and ecological parameters of a good part of a make-believe world. The more painstakingly this is done, the more real, and he puts that in quotes, this creation will become. Eventually, as player characters develop and grow powerful, they will explore and adventure over all of the area of the continent. When such activity begins, you must then broaden your general map still farther, so as to encompass the whole globe. More still, you must begin to consider seriously the makeup of your entire multiverse, space, planets, and their satellites, parallel worlds, the dimensions and planes. What is there? Why? Can participants in the campaign get there? How? Will they? Never fear. By the time your campaign has grown to such a state of sophistication, you will be ready to handle the new demands. Well, that's probably true. Often when you're running a campaign, the players discuss things they want to do, and it tips you off as to what to flesh out further, what to focus upon as needing detail, and that's your best guide. If they have no interest in space, there's no need to force it upon them or suggest that they go there. In fact, you'll be happier and they'll be happier if most of what you do is follow their lead, even as they believe they're probably following yours, because, hey, you must have wanted us to go here. There's all this detail. You just picked up on what they said the session before and filled out an area so that if they did indeed follow up and go there, you would be a little more ready, as we always say, prepared to improv. Improvisation is 99% preparation, as they say. Let's move on. Setting things in motion. There is nothing wrong with using a prepared setting to start a campaign, just as long as you are totally familiar with its precepts and they mesh with what you envision as the ultimate direction of your own milieu. Whatever doesn't match, remove from the material and substitute your own in its place. On the other hand, there is nothing to say that you are not capable of creating your own starting place. Just use whatever method is best suited to your available time and more likely to please your players. Until you are sure of yourself, lean upon the book. Improvisation might be fine later, but until you are completely relaxed as the DM, don't run the risk of trying to wing it unless absolutely necessary. Set up the hamlet or village where the action will commence with the player characters entering and interacting with the local population. Place regular people, some different and unusual types, and a few non-player characters in the various dwellings and places of business. Note vital information particular to each. Stock the goods available to the players. When they arrive, you will be ready to take on the persona of the settlement as a whole, as well as that of each individual therein. Be dramatic, witty, stupid, dull, clever, dishonest, tricky, hostile, etc., as the situation demands. The players will quickly learn who is who and what is going on, perhaps at the loss of a few coins. Having handled this, their characters will be equipped as well as circumstances will allow, and will be ready for their bold journey into the dangerous place where treasure abound and monsters lurk. So true, once you got everything set in place, let them explore it as they will. If you've got details on most of the shop keeps and places where they can find things they will need to help them explore, then you're ready to go. A few notes on the individuals, the NPCs, the people in and about the town, people who might have information that they want. Be sure to note some of that and how much they know. Be sure to make sure that the kinds of things that they will need to explore will be available to them. And if they're in a shop and they get some rope, there's no problem with suggesting they get some spikes, some iron spikes, some a grappling hook or something. And the shopkeep's job is to just try to sell more stuff. He sees somebody getting a rope, he's going to suggest these other items. They may forget otherwise, and it's always good to make sure that they feel as if they've equipped themselves well and have taken full advantage of what's available. I'll continue. The testing grounds for novice adventurers must be kept to a difficulty factor which encourages rather than discourages players. If things are too easy, then there's no challenge, and boredom sets in after one or two games. Conversely, impossible difficulty and character deaths cause instant loss of interest. Entrance to and movement through the dungeon level should be relatively easy, with a few tricks, traps, and puzzles to make it interesting in itself. Features such as rooms and chambers must be described with verve and sufficiently detailed in content to make each seem as if it were strange and mysterious. Creatures inhabiting the place must be of strength and in numbers not excessive compared to the adventurer's wherewithal to deal with them. Parenthetically, he says, you may at this point refer to the sample dungeon level and partial encounter key. In parentheses, this is a section of the DMG that is included with a beginning of a small dungeon or a larger dungeon. It definitely has room to be bigger. I'll continue. The general idea is to develop a dungeon of multiple levels, and the deeper adventurers go, the more difficult the challenges become. Fiercer monsters, more deadly traps, more confusing mazes, and so forth. This sample concept applies to areas outdoors as well. The more and terrible monsters occurring more frequently, the further one goes away from civilization. Many variations on dungeon and wilderness areas are possible. One can build an underground complex where distance away from any entry point approximates depth, or it can be in a mountain where adventurers work upwards. Outdoor adventures can be in a ruined city or a town which seems normal but is under a curse, or virtually anything which you can imagine, and then develop into a playable situation for your campaign participants. Whatever you settle upon as a starting point, be it your own design or one of the many modular settings which are commercially available, remember to have some overall plan of your milieu in mind. The campaign might grow slowly or it might mushroom. Be prepared for either event with more adventure areas and the reasons for everything which exists and happens. This is not to say that total and absolute perfect information will be needed, but a general schema is required. That is to say, not only don't you have to have every bit of information, but certainly the player characters are not going to gain perfect knowledge of why things are where they are and how they work. They might gain some knowledge. They might surmise some things based on the details you give them, but they should never know absolutely everything. They live in a world just like you live in a world, and nobody knows everything. So allow it to be mysterious. That is to say, they're more likely to look more closely at things that seem out of sorts, at odds, unreasonable, improbable. So for those things, you probably want to have information, at least in your own back pocket, to explain those things to yourself so that as they explore those oddities, they can gain more information and it will eventually, most likely, make sense. There may be some mysteries unfathomable that they will never get enough knowledge about to know everything about them or explain them to themselves or to anybody else. So don't feel like you have to have perfect knowledge or to give them or even make it available to them. But it can't hurt to have it so that when you describe things, at least in your own mind, they make sense and more memorable for you. You'll come back to things like that again and again, and it helps to understand it yourself so that you can describe it consistently. I'll continue. From this, you can give vague hints and ambiguous answers. It is no exaggeration to state that the fantasy world builds itself, almost as if the milieu actually takes on a life and reality of its own. This is not to say that an occult power takes over. It is simply that the interaction of judge and players shapes the bare bones and the initial creation into something far larger. It becomes fleshed out, and adventuring breathes life into a make-believe world. Similarly, the geography and history you assign to the world will suddenly begin to shape the character of states and peoples. Details of former events will become obvious from mere outlines of the past course of things. Surprisingly, as the personalities of player characters and non-player characters in the milieu are bound to develop and become almost real. The nations and states and events of a well-conceived AD&D world will take on even more of their own direction in life. What this all boils down to is that once the campaign is set in motion, you will become more of a recorder of events, while the milieu seemingly charts its own course. Well, there you go. 7 milieus in just 2 sections. This gets onto climate and ecology next. We're going to leave off here, though, because we've covered quite a bit with this campaign. And I think that's good enough. It is well to say that, once again, the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. Certainly the more your players will get out of it as you describe things. Your imagination is key, is said more than a few times throughout the DMG. And I think one of the important things to remember as you're creating things on your own, not just at the table and you're describing things to help others imagine, but while you're creating things, take a moment to move your hands away from the keyboard and set down the pen if you're really old school, and think about what's going on, what the place looks like, what it smells like, feels like, sounds like, all of the things, all of the senses you would bring to bear if you were in a location and checking it out on your own. George says, Mark, do you feel players today expect more specific details than on the in the past, or no change? Um, I don't think players expect more because it's more recent or used to expect more. I think it's really totally up to players. Players and DMs tend to develop a sort of shorthand when they're playing for a while, where those details of describing the first room of a dungeon with mold and water dripping and whatever else is in the room, puddles, and maybe there's some goo in the corner from where something was killed and it's decomposing, and the doors are heavy and there's a musty smell, and off in the distance you hear a scream, and all of that is a lot of fun the first time you hear it. But as a campaign goes on, if you describe every room in too great a detail, it's going to become repetitious and boring to a certain degree. So I don't think now or then makes any difference. I think it's up to players, and as you play with your players, you get a feel for how much description they're looking for. You can tell when people are hanging on to every word. You can tell when people are interested in getting more detail. Certainly, they'll ask questions. What does this particular feature look like? Can I hear anything? It seems like I would be able to hear a lot in a huge cavern. They'll give you reasons why, and if it makes sense, then certainly give them more, because they've gone to the trouble of trying to figure things out in your world so that they can have more information and hone the actions that they're going to take uh, to suit your world. So give them fodder, give them stuff to help them immerse themselves even more. That's my suggestion anyway. Clock on the wall says we're getting there, so I'm going to say thanks to everybody who popped into the chat and who checked us out on Twitch today. It's much appreciated. I will also say this has been a pretty fun show. Good section, absolutely great section of the Dungeon Masters Guide, the campaign, and setting things in motion. Remember, Mondays at 10 a.m. or thereabouts. The show streams live on Twitch each Monday at 10 a.m. Central and is then archived on YouTube if you're catching up with us on Twitch. If you're here for a live show, please do make sure to subscribe to the channel and pop into the chat and say hello. Let us know you're there. It's much appreciated when you do. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, by all means, subscribe over there and click on the little bell so you get updates when we have new shows updated or uploaded to the YouTube archive. Feel free to give a thumbs up on videos that you like and enjoy, and also comment. If there are any things you want to chime in on the theme or constructive criticism about the show, it is greatly appreciated and always welcome. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.